This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Stevenson with his own moves. Carrington. North are in front.
Hello and welcome back to North Pod after a successful preliminary final. Plenty happening in North Melbourne land this week. The biggest news, I guess, being that we are through to the grand final in the AFLW, which is super exciting. Second grand final in a row and second time against Brisbane. So, yeah, massive preliminary final win to talk about. We've also had the draft during the week for the men's program, national draft, pre-season, rookie draft. So a bit to talk about. I'm going to do a draft review episode in the next few days, so I'm not going to touch too much on that for right now. I've been fairly busy the last little while, so yeah, we'll aim to get that in the next couple of days. But this episode, we are going to focus on the preliminary final for the AFLW against Port Adelaide. So yeah, let's start there because obviously there's lots and lots of positive things to talk about there. Team selection is where we usually start, and there was one change. It was an expected change, and that was Emma Carney coming back in. Unfortunately, at the expense of Eliza Shannon, but that was, always going to be the case. Shannon played a fantastic qualifying final and played her role in that win. But the captain was always going to come back in. She was a chance to play in the qualifying final, didn't quite get up. So 2 weeks later, we see her return. And that's unfortunately, that's what elite sport is about. You're going to sometimes miss out. And who knows, maybe there's an opportunity for Eliza Shannon next week. You'd think probably not. It's going to probably take an injury. But there was always, I did wonder if potentially we'd like her to take control or look after the Port Adelaide dangerous forwards. Ultimately, Emma Carney's drive and leadership off half-back were always going to come back in, and she was straight back into the game, had a massive tackle very early on in the game and won a holding the ball call virtually straight away. So impact right away, as you'd expect, and she was there and available if the game was tight. As it turns out, we were able to really ease her back in, particularly given how hot it was. She didn't play a lot of game time, but she certainly got her feet wet and she'll be ready for the grand final next week, which, hopefully, or you would assume we're probably going to be requiring her services a little bit more next week. So that was the only change. Like I said, it's hard to see the side changing for next week based on how he played, but look, you never know. I'm sure Eliza Shannon and Lulu Puller, these types will be staying fit and ready to go. Neve Martin's another that, she's played a big part of the season and now finds her way out of the side. It's an unfortunate thing when you're fit and when you're healthy and when you have lots of players pushing for selection, that there's going to be some unlucky few. So that's what team selection looks like. We then obviously go to the match result and a very hot afternoon. North Melbourne come out on top winners 12-6, 78, defeated Port Adelaide 2-9, 21, 57-point winners. Like I said, super hot, 35 plus, sunny, and really the weather didn't change until the last quarter. The wind sort of started coming in and it cooled down a little bit, but it was a very, very hot afternoon. You could see players were getting ice packs and fans and all sorts of things on the bench to keep them cool or as cool as possible. And I think for me, it does speak volumes. It's hard. It's easier said than done, but I would have thought that there's a way that you can maybe change the time of this game and not have it be in the hottest part of a really, really hot day. I know they enacted the heat plan, which meant that there were some longer breaks, and I acknowledge that. That's obviously an easier accommodation to make, but yeah, I just wonder if there would have been a way to, move this away from a really, have it later in the day or earlier in the day. Like, just the hottest part of the day didn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, we got through and it really was a hot game and a hot start for us. A demolition from the start, really. 4 quick goals. We were off the race in the first quarter. We nearly put the game to bed in the first quarter. I do think it took a little bit of a second quarter effort to completely put it beyond doubt. But yeah, 4 quick goals. Garner, Randall and Tutu O'Loughlin really set the tone for what was going to be a pretty dominant half of football. Randall put on a big bump and a tackle, which resulted in a holding the ball call and a goal for her, which really, I thought, set the tone. It was a really physical start by us, and we just didn't give Port Adelaide any space at all. That the pressure around the footy was immense, and I think that was a big part of what enabled us to have that early success. We saw Taylor Gatt streaming forward and kicking long to create scoring chances, which we know, I think, we look our best when Taylor Gatt's doing that. Tripodi took advantage of less attention being on her and was able to create some great link up. We really just shut the gate on them in that first half. It was certainly done at halftime, and I think, halfway through the second quarter, you probably could have called it. At that point, it was just such a dominant start. I think Port they did. They rallied a little bit in the second half, and they did create some opportunities. Even late in the second quarter, you could see that they were at least creating some chances. They missed a shot that would have given them their first goal right on half-time, and it created more scoring opportunities in the second half, which allowed them eventually to score a couple of consolation goals in that last quarter. But we were never really threatened. The fact that we were able to play Carney for only 38% of the game tells the story. A 57-point win in the heat and a home grand final secured again. So we will be back at Icon Park next Saturday. Hopefully not as hot, but it'd be nice if it was a nice sunny sort of mid-20s. You could get around that, I think. We'll be playing Brisbane. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast. I was expecting it, or I thought it might be Adelaide. I just think they've been so strong across the season, and they really pushed us in both of those games that we played against them. But Brisbane's managed to beat Adelaide twice this year now. So despite us absolutely belting Brisbane earlier in the season, it does give you some pause for thought, I suppose, because you just don't know what can happen in a grand final. We saw what happened last year. So that's the game overview. I guess we'll jump into the story of the game, and I don't usually do this, but I really think it was all about one person's game. You may have heard of it. Jasmine Garner just had an immense second quarter. The game wasn't quite dead at quarter time, but she came out and just absolutely put it to bed and just showed that she's got more gears than everyone else to get to. She just rose to the occasion, was doing some real damage with her disposals. She had 2 score involvements to start the second quarter, as well as a couple of clearances. Had a really great kick later in the quarter to find Sheila, who goaled. That was straight after Tess Craven and got absolutely cleaned up. I'll talk about that. But she just put the game to bed, to put it simply. And spoiler, she's getting the 4 votes when we get to the 5 stars in a minute, because when the game was there to be won, she was immense. She had a good first quarter, but the second quarter, I think, she really stood out, and like I said, just took the game away from Port Adelaide. And that was a big part of why we went in at halftime 50-odd points up. Exactly. It was 52-50 at halftime, and I think 52-2. Sorry, and that was she was a massive part of that because of the score involvements and the impact she was having, the meters she was getting on the ball in that first half. Her stat line from 69% of the game time, so you could definitely be playing her more than that if you need to. 25 touches, 3 marks, 6 tackles, so a pretty standard Jazzy Garner game there. Kicked a goal. And then it's just 8 clearances, most on the ground, 520 metres gained, most on the ground, 3 goal assists, most on the ground, 8 inside 50s, most on the ground, 9 score involvements, most on the ground, 6 intercepts, and all of her, across her disposals went at 80%. So just an absolutely dominant stat line. And one of those games where the stats matched up with what you saw on the screen. Sometimes a player can have a game and fill the stats sheet, but not necessarily, create a lot of impact or create noticeable impact on the game. This was not one of those games. Every time she had the footy, she was making a positive impact for us and just bullying the Port Adelaide midfield, really, with her strength. The 520 metres gained is the big one there. She is a metres gained player. She's a big kick, but I've talked about it ad nauseum this year. The AFLW game is really built around territory and getting the ball in your half and then winning contest. And the fact that she was able to get more than 500 metres gain for us, the ball practically lived in our half in that first half of the game. And she was a big part of that, because as soon as she got her hands on it, it was a long kick into our forward half, and then we were able to set up the wall and just keep it in there. So yeah, literally try and stop her. It can't be done. She's had a really dominant second half of the year and is going to be really hard to beat, I think, for the North Best and Fairest when that comes around soon. But yeah, whilst she had plenty of mates, coming along for the ride with her, she was the one that I think absolutely took the game away from Port Adelaide and put it beyond doubt. So for me, it was just the Jasmine Garner show in that first half, and then that allowed us to give her a bit more of a rest in the second half. That's why she probably spent, give or take 10% less game time than she normally would. And that was perfect given how hot the conditions were. You didn't want to be overexerting your best players. That's why we really eased Emma Carney back into it. I think she might have spent the last 20 minutes of the game on the bench, and like I said, less than half the game on. So yeah, just a massive game from Garner, and like I said, as I transition into the 5 stars, she gets the 4 votes for best on. Like, what more do I need to say? Just listen to the last 5 minutes, and that's a good summation of why she got the 4 votes. Then, as always, it was a bit tricky to order because there was lots of contributors underneath that. Vicky Wall's late goal, I think, got her across the line for the 3 votes. 14 touches, 3 goals, 4 tackles, a goal assist, had another score involvement on top of that. And just, in the second half was immense. She was the perfect version of Vicky Wall, the best version of Vicky Wall. Like I mentioned, had an absolute ripper goal in that last quarter, a bomb from 50. Sure, the wind was swirling around a little bit, so I think she got a little bit of help from that, and that allowed the forwards and the defenders not quite read it as well off the boot. So it got over the back for a goal, but prior to that, she kicked a couple of really good goals in the third quarter, just right when Port Adelaide were just putting up a bit of a fight. It wasn't, the game wasn't in the balance or anything like that, but Port had some territory and, they'd missed a few shots at goal. They weren't able to capitalise. And then, Vicky Wall within 1 minute kicked 2 goals and just, absolutely buried and punished Port Adelaide. She was at her tackling and pressuring best, hitting the scoreboard, like I said, with the 3 goals and then 2 other score involvements, including an assist. And just in general being a menace, that's what she's in the side for. She's a really physical, fast, tackling pressure forward. Not always getting on the end of them like she did in this game, but 3 goals I think is a reward for the massive effort that she's put in this season. And second game in a row, I gave her a vote in the qualifying final. I thought she had a really good qualifying, really impactful qualifying final, and then stepped up again the prelim. She's a finals type player, Vicky Wall. So 3 votes to her. 2 votes, I think Ruby Tripodi probably is one of those that could, based on the stat line, maybe slip under the radar, but I thought her impact on the game, particularly when it was hot early, was phenomenal. 16 disposals, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 4 clearances, 4 inside 50s, 3 score involvements. And I think just had some really important impact at contest, took advantage of being that kind of 3rd or 4th fiddle in the middle. It's a nice little rhyme. Garner and Riddell obviously get a lot of attention, and Mia King, I think this year in particular, has gone to another level and has required some extra attention. And that's meant that Tripodi generally is, the player that the opposition is applying the least pressure to or is loosest on. And that she really has taken advantage of that. I think she's grown significantly across the year. And just the major thing for me is her possessions are meaningful. It's not dump kicks or quick hands to no one. When she gets her hands on the footy, it's effective, quick touches. She's putting her teammates into space, and she's just a really good decision maker with ball in hand. So I think deserving of the 2 votes. I think she's had a really consistent year, and probably, most weeks, if you're voting on has she got her job done, I think she has, because just a really strong competitor. And I thought, like I said, her quick hands and her ability to give teammates space was the difference maker for her between, her and some of the other options. So 2 votes for the youngster, Ruby Tripodi. It's great to have those younger players coming through and showing their talent in come finals. And then I had to get a defender in there. I've gone with Libby Birch. It just as easily could have been Sarah Wright. I thought they were both terrific in that intercepting halfback role. But Libby Birch, 15 disposals, 7 marks, 2 of those contested, 350 metres gained, 6 intercepts. And when that defensive wall needed to be set up, her and Sarah Wright were there. The two of them worked alongside Jazz Ferguson, and just none of them were able, or none of the Port Adelaide players were able to penetrate that group up until really the last quarter. The wall broke down a little bit in that last quarter, but like I've said earlier, the game was done well before that point. The 3 of those key defenders also didn't go to the bench at all. They spent the entire game on the field, so allowed some of the other players to get that extra time on the bench and rotate. And, look, there was definitely parts of the game where I'm sure they were sitting there guarding space and not having to do a lot in that first half because the ball spent so much time in our forward line. But like I said, then when the ball did start coming down, I thought Birch's positioning and her strength in the contest was fantastic. That's why she was able to pull in those 2 contested marks and 6 intercepts in total. I think the fact that the Port's got some dangerous forwards. Houghton's quite dangerous. They just didn't look like impacting it at all. Port didn't have a mark inside 50, which again I think speaks at least in part to how well the Tools were defending. And I just think, the intercepting and ability really for them to read the play and be in that dangerous space so that when Port did get a quick kick away, one of those 3 was set up, or potentially a wingman. I saw Kim Rennie do it a couple of times as well. Just the communication between the group. But I think individually Libby Birch was probably the best of that group at putting herself in the right spot. And I think in the second and third quarters when Port was making their run, for me, she was one that was making a significant difference there. Like I said, Sarah Wright was amazing too at intercepting, but I could only pick one. It does give me, I guess, a bit of a pause and an opportunity to think about the fact that, last year in finals when we didn't quite make it across the line, we did have some defensive issues. I think Libby Birch is one that, can come in and potentially help with that. And I do think it's interesting that 2 out of, half of the vote getters here are quote-unquote newcomers. I know that Vicky Wall was... has been at North before this year, but she wasn't around last year. So having Wall and Birch both in the votes probably does speak to the fact that, that's where our growth from last year to this year is going to come from in some parts, those important inclusions. And then the growth through Tripodi is also in there through that younger group. We've got so many of those young players that have played well across the year, like Tripodi, O'Loughlin, Taylor Gatt. Just to name a few, Neve Martin's had a really good half of the year when she was able to get in the side. So, I guess it's interesting to think about. I know we've got this mature, really elite top half or top group that we know are special players, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that there's this other group of players coming through underneath that are, that are also contributing. It's not just those elite players carrying us. So, that's the 5 stars. Like I said, Sarah Wright's pretty unlucky. Riddell had 27 touches and accumulated. She's pretty unlucky. Taylor Gatt and O'Loughlin were great when they were involved. They both kicked 2 goals, but probably just drifted in and out a little bit too much to get in the votes. And Randall and Sheila were really damaging up forward as well. It's one of those games where it was a really even performance from probably 12 or 13 players. So, if you probably wouldn't complain if any of those ones that I mentioned were also in the votes, because besides Garner, I don't think there was another massive standout, but certainly some really good contributions from those players that I listed. In terms of the best opposition player, I mean, look, in a belting, it's always hard to analyse it, but I thought Matilda Scholz was really good in the ruck for Port. Only 7 touches, but they were all kicks, 4 tackles, 28 hit-outs, 4 clearances. Dominated the ruck really against Rennie and King. She was definitely the best ruck woman on the ground. And then when Port was getting going in that second half, I think it was Scholz that was a big part of that. She was grabbing out of the ruck and just kicking it. She's a really big, intimidating ruck woman, so her ability to get her hands on it and just use her physicality, I thought, did make a difference. Potentially if she'd done that earlier on and just grabbed the footy and really asserted her physicality, but potentially Port is a bit more competitive in that first half. But I thought she was a standout. The main person in that area of the ground where Port Adelaide did actually have some dominance or at least a win, the ruck, and to a lesser extent the midfield battle. Matilda Scholz I thought was best, but it's always going to be hard to find a winner, so to speak, for the opposition in such a one-sided game. And then I guess what the 5 stars North Podium looks like now with one game left. It's always been a bit tricky to say how many are left because you don't know exactly how many finals you're going to be playing, but now we know there's just that grand final left. So Jazzy Garner a little bit out in front on 42 votes. She's really pulled ahead based on a really strong second half of the year. No one's going to get close to chasing her down. Ash Riddell, 23, is locked into second place. And then third place now is down to Kate Sheelaw and Alice O'Loughlin. They're both on 11 votes. So one of those two is going to potentially finish up third or stay equal third on the podium. And then below that, Libby Birch 6, Eddie 6, Randall and Mia King 5, Wall Tripodi 4, Gat, Wright, Carney 3, Craven and O'Shea 2. So a nice even spread underneath that. You can see about 2/3 of the team have been in the votes for the year, so it's a nice big spread, but one game to go with first, second locked in, and third or fourth the only thing that could potentially change. So let's jump into the negatives and positives from the game. Obviously, in a big win like this, there's not a lot in terms of the negatives, or it's at least the negatives are, I guess, a bit more speculative or thinking ahead. I think late in that second quarter and during the second half, we did take our foot off the pedal a little bit and allowed them to control territory more than you'd like. We still only gave up 2 goals, so it's not a hangable offence by any stretch, but 11 scoring shots I think is probably more than you'd like them to have. The thing that has worried me all year is that our defence it does look a little bit shaky one-on-one or when the ball's getting in there nice and fast, and this game was no exception. There was definitely elements of danger in the last quarter and even in the third quarter. It's just that Port weren't quite able to capitalise. If the ball does come in quickly, we do lack a little bit of height and we do lack a little bit of strength, I think, in those taller defenders. We know that Libby Birch has come across and made a massive difference, and I think with our team defence that it has made a big difference, but I do think we're still a little bit weak one-on-one at times, and when that ball's coming in a lot faster. In the context of this game, it's not a problem. We won by 50-odd points. It's no big deal, but I think next week against Brisbane, we're going to need to be better 1v1 defensively. We're going to need to compete more, and we're going to need our midfield to make sure that there's none of that really lovely fast ball coming in and putting our defenders in those positions where they're stuck a little bit. Port's inside 50 efficiency was 44.8% in this game, which is a lot higher than we normally give up. It's pretty much bang on with what our efficiency was. Ours was 44.2, so essentially the same or 0.6% off. So they were just as efficient as us going once they got the ball inside 50. It was just that really in that first half we just didn't allow them to get the ball in there at all, which is why we went in with a 50-point lead. So I think that for me is an area that I'd just like to see tightened up a little bit. I think our drive off half-back is fantastic. We know we've got Carney. We know O'Shea can do it. Tess Craven can do that at times. Nicole Bresnahan can do that. And we know, like I mentioned, when the ball's locked inside our 50, I feel really confident that the likes of Birch and Wright and Ferguson can set up that wall and intercept nicely. It's when the ball gets past that initial flow and we're into a bit of a rebounding, attacking, catapulting style of game, or if it comes out of a centre clearance and it goes forward fast for the opposition, that's where I think we're a little bit vulnerable and where potentially sides could get us. We saw Dakota Davidson, who we know we're going to have to play next week, is a really dangerous player one-on-one. She's one that I think, could potentially get a hold of us. So, I think the game plan either has to be let's tighten up some individual defensive strategies or let's figure out how we can make sure there's really the minimum amount of fastball coming into our defense, because it's a little weakness of ours. It's not a massive gaping hole, but it's certainly not the strongest area of the ground for us. And whether that's because we've got, a couple too many attacking types in our defensive half, or whether it's just, we're a bit undersized and, to be honest, don't get a lot of practice or game practice in there. I'm not too sure. But yeah, that's a little bit of a concern for me. The other area of concern was the ruck. I mentioned it earlier. Emma King and Kim Rennie were pretty thoroughly beaten in the ruck. It was really the only area of the ground that we were beaten, I thought. Scholz is a really good ruck woman, so it's not a massive issue, but to lose the hit out 39-29 is not ideal. And I thought that Scholz's ruck work was a lot better than ours in terms of finding her midfielders. We lost the clearances 31-29, so essentially level there. But like I said, you'd want to be having that hit-out battle a little bit more even so that we're able to get more advantage to our midfielders, because we know that we've got a really strong midfield. That's one of the areas that we are elite in, and so they don't need a lot, but they do need some help. They need to at least have some access to the footy, and yeah, I just don't think that King and Rennie were able to do that consistently in this game, or at least nullify Scholz's work in the contests. Rennie was at least able to have some impact around the ground, which helps. She had 12 touches, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, and a couple of marks. So whilst she wasn't setting the world on fire in the ruck, she was able to at least get her hands on the footy around the ground, or when the ball hit the ground. Emma King had a bit of a dirtier day, didn't bring her kicking boots, had a couple of shots at goal, one that was a point and one that was sprayed out of bounds that she'd probably like back. So yeah, you just love to have a bit more of an even contest. Not everyone's going to have a best on ground performance, and that's okay. But yeah, this is, again, it's just an area of the ground that I think we could improve in, because you just want to look for those spots where you could improve, particularly when you're playing so well. There's always going to be things that you gloss over a little bit, and you want to make sure that the coaching staff and the players are at least acknowledging that these things aren't going well, so that when another area of the ground falls down or is not working, you're making sure that this one is propped back up. So yeah, you'd love to see the rucks getting a little bit more involved, giving our mids a little bit more access, and Garner and co don't need much to get going. So I think that'll be addressed. We don't need a dominant ruck performance, but an even hit-out differential, I think, would be what we're aiming for against Brizzy. And then the last negative, like I said, it's pretty small nitpicks for this week, because when you win a prelim very comfortably, you're generally pretty happy. I guess the hot weather does give me a little bit of cause for concern in terms of recovering for next week. It is a full 7-day break, so that's great. It's not a 6-day break. But, playing in such hot conditions is not ideal, even for the best teams. And like everyone, we do have a group of older players who, are probably going to need every minute to recover between now and the grand final. It's the same as the case for our opposition, but I don't know that their game was played in quite as hot conditions. So, and also Brisbane would be a little bit better, more conditioned to playing in the hot as well. So that does concern me a little bit, particularly if it's a close game next week and you need your legs to be at full capacity in that last quarter. I think potentially playing in this hot conditions is going to impact that. But that being said, again, I thought the coaching group did a great job of making sure that everyone that needed a rest got a rest. I mentioned Garner, she only played 69% of game time, and a few of those mids were pretty similar, not playing 80 and 90% and being absolutely gassed. If I pull up the stats here, Tripodi also had 69% playing time. The ones in the hundreds and the 90s are the defenders and a couple of small forwards. Like I mentioned before, Wright, Ferguson and Birch played the whole game. O'Shea, O'Loughlin and Randall were those that were playing in the high 80s, and then then it goes down and you've got the rest of players. So I think the coaching group did a good job to make sure that players weren't overused, given it was a 9 or 10 goal win. But yeah, I think that's just one to watch if we do look pretty gassed or run off our feet late next week. That might have something to do with the hot weather and the capacity to recover from such a hot game, I guess. But let's talk about the positives, because obviously in a win like this, there were many. I think watching the game, the big takeaway for me and the really promising thing going into a grand final is You can see that the players believe in the system and their teammates, they believe in their teammates, they believe in the system, and the fact that their teammates are going to win contests. You see, that's how Sheila so often finds space out the back. As soon as we win the ball back, she's off, she's galloping down the field and backing her teammates to get it to her. A perfect example of this was in the third quarter. Bruton and Eddie had some interplay on the wing, and eventually it came inside 50. Sheila was never going to make it to that contest. It was an aerial contest. She just sprinted forward, backed in her teammates to win that, and rather than getting sucked into that contest. And eventually, because she'd run forward, her teammates were able to get it onto her. She then unselfishly handballed it to Taylor Gatt, but again, that's just another sign of teammates backing each other in. But for me, watching it, it was just so clear as day. I think, a player that didn't believe in her teammates would have ran to that contest, tried to make an impact, rather than just running forward. Now, you could see it as, being a bit goal hungry, but she was finding the space and creating the space and creating opportunity for when we did win that footy, she was going to be able to, run into an open goal, which is essentially what she did. For me, that's just massive trust in the teammates. That's, belief that the structure the coaching group have got in place. So, yeah, I think that's really encouraging to see. You don't need crowded contest inside your forward 50 when the ball's coming in fast. So she's made a great choice there not to drag her defender to the contest, or if her defender does get dragged in, all of a sudden you're a free goal side, and that's a great place to be if you're a forward. So yeah, that's an example of what I think you see across the whole game. As soon as North Melbourne players win the ball back or turn it over, we switch modes really quickly, and as a team the structure sets up really well. That's why we're able to see that wall set up defensively by the key pillars and the wings to make sure the ball stays inside 50. That's why Sheila is so often able to get at the back, because another player like Alice O'Loughlin potentially has found some space further up. And they just trust each other implicitly to be in the spots that they expect them to be in. So that's the kind of trust and the kind of chemistry that you want going into a grand final, and hopefully we can see some more of that. I think another major thing, despite it being a pretty dominant performance, there's still little moments that I think continue to create the big wins for us. Obviously the stats sheet read pretty nicely, but I think the stats sheet is a byproduct of our ability to do the small things correctly, or to do the small things and go above and beyond in some ways. Tess Craven running back with the flight and getting just absolutely poleaxed in our forward 50 created a contest, and that contest meant that Jazzy Garner was able to crumb it. Now, if Craven hadn't gone back with the flight, it's an uncontested mark for Port, and then they're able to get it on up to the wing, and all of a sudden it's out of our forward line, and our defence is under pressure. But like I said, she was courageous. She went back with the flight. She got absolutely smashed. And I think it was a pretty fair contest for what it's worth. She just, that's what happens when you're running back with the flight. You put yourself at risk. Garner crumbed it, kicked it to Sheila. Sheila kicked a goal. And that's, that's footy for North Melbourne at the moment. It was really, really fantastic to see. And as soon as she'd kicked the footy forward, Jazzy went over and made sure that the Tess Craven was okay. She did go off with the trainers and I guess get checked over, but she was playing. That was late in the second quarter, and she was back playing in the second half, so she must have been okay. But a small thing that made a big difference, led directly to a goal. I think Amy Smith continued to be a real pest and intercept those quick kicks that Port Adelaide were forced to do under pressure. So often she was in that space in the hole. And I think it's great to have, Taylor Gatt is a pretty offensive wing person. I think Amy Smith is a really good juxtaposition to that. She's quite defensively minded. We've seen her put on some big tackles and some big running efforts over the last month or so of football. So they're a great yin and yang on the wings. Not to say that Taylor Gatt doesn't have a defensive element to her game, but I think most of the best stuff that she does is when she's running forward and holding her shape on that offensive wing. The wings are doing a fantastic job in their respective roles. I mentioned it earlier on, but Emma Carney's big tackle and holding the ball win early in the game gave us some momentum right away and really set the tone. And that was followed up by Talia Randall's physicality. She brings that every week, but she's just such a physical warrior, Talia Randall, and she started the game with a big shepherd or a big bump that then led to a tackle and a holding the ball call again, and she was able to kick a goal from that. So it's these little moments that seem small that result in big impact that is what leads to a 9 or 10 goal win. Jazzy Garner and Ash Riddell just refusing to be beaten in the middle of the ground. They were being ridden essentially, so they weren't able to get clean disposal, but eventually some handballs, some tapping it forward, it allowed time for Tripodi to get a clearing kick, and again, that clearing kick led to a goal. There's a scenario where instead of Tripodi's kick coming about, it's just a repeat stoppage, and we start again, but Garner and Riddell just didn't allow that to happen. They refused to be tackled properly, and opened up the game for us in a positive way. The big three across the back, Wright, Birch and Ferg, just communicating so well and setting us up behind the ball. I've probably mentioned that about 17 times this episode, but it does make such a big difference when you've got that wall built up and you're not allowing the easy uncontested marks from a quick kick out of defensive 50 for Port. They just really didn't get any of that. They had to take their time and I guess get some metres on the ball either through foot or handball before they were able to find an uncontested mark. Like I said, all of these things leads to the stat wins. So we led inside 50s 43 to 29. We had 63 marks to 21. We had 11 marks inside 50 to none. We had 60 more uncontested possessions. So those things are a direct byproduct of those little things that you're doing over and over again, because the wall is what allows you those uncontested possession differentials, because you're just not giving the opposition any of those uncontested possessions. The marks inside 50 speaks to the fact they weren't getting any really easy balls going inside 50. They had to grub it, and that's as a result of that wall being set up. So yeah, a lot to like about the way that we're playing. We're still playing selflessly. We're still playing team first. And, that's what you need. Come finals time, a physical team first approach. And that's what we've seen from the two matches so far. And then I think the final positive is probably a little bit backhanded, but go with me on it. I do think there's still room for some players to improve. You don't want everyone to be absolutely at their best, because at that point you go, we've only got, we can only go backwards. So, I think, as I mentioned, the rucks could probably improve a little. I thought Alice O'Loughlin, she had a quiet first final and she bobbed up in the first quarter, but she drifted in and out. Tess Craven and O'Shea and Bresnahan could probably all impact and drive off halfback a little more. And look, part of their problem, so to speak, is the ball's not getting down there as much. But we've definitely seen that particularly O'Shea and Craven have been able to still impact despite, not necessarily getting as much opportunities as other sides' halfbacks might get. Mia King just had a quieter game. Nothing wrong with her game at all, but she was probably, our fourth best midfielder on the day. So, she's definitely had some big games and could improve. Bella Eddy also a more quieter game after a really blistering qualifying final where she essentially won the game for us. So, the reality is you're never going to have a game where everyone plays a 10 out of 10 game. There's just not the capacity for it. There's not the time in the game for it. It's not reality. But you do need to have enough players step up and do it. And I think what's promising for me is, there were some players that stepped up and played, a little bit beyond or above their expected level against Port, and we're going to need that same thing against Brisbane next week, and hopefully some different players are going to do it, because we know that Jazzy Garner and Ash Riddell, we know exactly what you're going to get from them, and I think we know what we're going to get from a lot of players. But if you're a small forward, you'd be hard pressed to back Vicky Wall in to kick 3 goals again next week. But it doesn't matter so much if she's not doing that, so long as O'Loughlin or Bella Eddy, someone else is doing that in her place and kicking some small forward goals. And I feel so confident that someone's going to be able to do it, because we've seen it all year that players bob up and are able to impact no matter how well they've been playing the previous week. Or, in Eddie's case, I thought she's had a pretty quiet, 6 or so weeks, but second half of the season, she's been more quiet. She hasn't been able to, hit the scoreboard like we saw her do in the first part of the year. But then she bobs up and kicks some really crucial goals and, wins us the game more or less. So that's what we're going to need to see next week. But I do think it's promising that we're able to have such a dominant performance with, these players not being 10 out of 10 performances. Lachlan did kick 2 goals in that first quarter, so there's an argument there that, she's done her job, but I think she could be she could get involved more consistently, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. And, similarly, I think Craven, she probably gets a pass because she got belched into next week, but we've seen games where she's been able to really directly impact with her kicking, and we probably just didn't see that in this game against Port. But like I said, it's not going to happen every week. So yeah, I guess that's the game in a nutshell. It was a pretty relaxing game to watch, given the fact that we went up 4 goals early and just didn't look like losing it when you're 50 points up at half time. It's quite a luxury to watch a preliminary final like that, and a different story to what we saw in the finals last year. We had a couple of nail biters. I think it was a 1-point win to get into the grand final last year. So a big contrast for us here to win the prelim in this fashion. It's interesting to think about what it might have been like if we were playing against the Hawks, because it was a bit of an upset with Port Adelaide beating Hawthorn last week, but it doesn't matter in the end. We've played who we've had to play, and I guess we look ahead to next week. Like I said, we'll be playing Brisbane. It's a grand final rematch from last year. Saturday, 7:45 at Icon Park. It's a night game, so even if it is another hot day, at least we're not playing in the hottest part of the day. It might be a warm evening, and by the time it comes for the second half, the sun's gone down, and you're playing in much more reasonable conditions. And I think, we go in undefeated all year. That's the pro. We beat Brisbane up there by 44 points earlier in the year. Another pro. We just have to hope, I guess, that there's no scars lingering from losing that grand final last year. I think it's okay to still be hurting and to still be thinking about that game, but you don't want to be necessarily going in worried that the same thing's going to happen again as a player. As a fan, that's certainly what I'm worried about. But our form this year has been stronger. Like I said, undefeated. We've beaten Brisbane. We've beaten Adelaide twice. We've beaten Port Adelaide twice. Geelong's the only side that we weren't quite able to get over the hill against, and that was round 2 in some pretty poor conditions. So, I think as players we should go in with a lot of confidence, and just that's what you want to ride, that wave of confidence, but just underneath that arrogant bar. In terms of Brisbane and who I'm concerned about, what you're going to get from someone like Ellie Anderson. She's a really good midfielder. I think knowing what Dakota Davidson did to us in last year's grand final concerns me. And a big part of that is the sort of player that she is. I've mentioned that I think that our defence can be a little bit weak sometimes in one-on-one contests. It's an area that we're a little bit weaker around the ground, and that's obviously a strength of hers. So it's going to be on the mids and the forwards to make sure that she's getting, I guess the service that Davison's getting is as messy as possible, so that she's not getting one-on-ones on the lead or the ball really sat on our head so that she can jump up and take some strong marks. I do not want to see that. She really took the game away from us in the second half last year. But honestly, I just think we go in, we should be super confident. If we play anything close to our best, I think we win based on how we've played this year. It's been a really dominant year, but it's just a weird feeling to be in this position as a North Melbourne fan. I know the women's program's strong, and we've seen the last 2 years it's been a really, really strong side. But based on what we've watched with the men's side, it's a weird place mentally to be sitting in, because we're just so conditioned to going into the game as an underdog and hoping to be competitive. Whereas really, if this season it's been, if we don't win comfortably, it's a bit of a disappointing game. So that is what the grand final holds for us next weekend. Like I said, Saturday evening at Icon Park. I know there's been some talk around the fact that the grand final is a night game, and are the AFL trying to, I guess, use this as a trial for when they potentially move the men's program to a night final as well. I just think it's a bit dodgy because they market the whole game as being family friendly and then put it on at night time. But I understand the financials of it. I don't really have an issue with it. It's a bit of have your cake and eat it too for mine. But anyway, we'll play anywhere, and hopefully, doesn't matter where we play, we're able to get this night win and win our inaugural women's premiership and bring home the first North Melbourne premiership, or at least in the AFL program since 1999. We know the VFLW had a win this year, but I think this would be one step better. So that's what we'll hope for. I guess that's going to do it for this episode. I did mention it earlier on. The AFL National Draft happened earlier in the week, so we had plenty of movement in that, plenty of thoughts to provide on that one. So I will be dropping an episode about that in the coming days, so you can look forward to that. I do have a lot of thoughts about what we did the draft and where that has us sitting in terms of next year. So I will get around to that, and then I will obviously talk post Grand Final with you at some point. It's been a really successful AFLW season. We've got one game to go, one game of footy to go for the year before we can have a little rest over the summer, and hopefully the North Melbourne boys aren't having a rest. Hopefully they're smashing their bodies getting ready for next year, and we can hope for the men's program to give us something like the women's have been at the moment, because it's really exciting to be into another grand final. So hope you have a fantastic week. Hopefully this warmer weather is what you're after. It's not what I'm after, but I've had my winter, so fair play. And I'll speak to you in the coming days. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.